A lot going on in Baton Rouge. Let's talk politics. Roll it, Bobby. How about this, huh? In front of the touchscreen with John Couvillon, JMC Politics, Polling and Analytics. And man, one of our favorite subjects is politics. And look at this field of candidates running for mayor here in EBR. Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome, Ted James, Coach Sid Edwards, Ryan Bad Business Carter. Anyway, so let's talk about this field, man. What were your initial thoughts when everything closed up?
Number one, it was a late developing field. Number two, you could think of infinite number of possibilities as to what the runoff configuration would be. But I think for starters, we basically have to put Mayor Sharon Weston Broome into a guaranteed runoff spot.
So that's what I thought. I talked about that last week on TV, that you've got the mayor in the top spot. Now, what's interesting is going into qualifying, it's her and it's Ted James.
Right.
Sid getting into this is different because he's very well liked here in the parish. Football coach, getting in, Republican. His impact on this race, I think, has a lot to do with Ted James because he pulls Republican votes off of Ted James. Do you agree with that?
Partially, because the thing you have to appreciate is, I would say right now that East Baton Rouge Parish has about a 45% Republican contingent. When you combine that with the fact that this will be held at the same time as the presidential election, you have to think of basically a 55-45 Democratic-Republican split.
Right.
What that means in plain terms is, I would say Mayor Sharon Weston Broome easily gets 40 to 45% of that 55. That's a guaranteed runoff slot. Then we start talking about who's going to get the remaining vote in sufficient numbers to make the runoff. Sid Edwards was certainly an interesting entry.
Yeah.
However, the questions in my mind would be, number one, what kind of money he has to wage a competitive campaign. Number two, who's managing his campaign. Number three, the fact that we have other Republicans that are going to be splitting that 45%. And oh, by the way, some of that 45%, though a minute segment, is going to go to Ted James. So you theoretically could have a 15 to 20% vote that gets someone into the runoff with Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome.
We go back to 2016, the first run for Mayor President Broome, and it just shows the force of the Democratic Party in East Baton Rouge Parish. You see what Bodie White did, pulling 29% of the vote, getting about 56,000 votes. Between Mayor President Broome and then C. Denise Marcel as a candidate, I mean, they pull over 85,000 votes. So if and people have talked about it, if Representative Marcel wasn't in that race, Mayor Broome probably wins without a runoff. If you look at 2024 now, Trump's on the ballot again. She's been on the ballot with him every time she's won and run and won.
Yes.
If it's her versus a strong candidate that can pull both the African American vote and Republican vote, I think really, man, it puts her in a tough spot. Edwards being in this thing right now for me is interesting because if he gets into a runoff with her, I don't see any reality where he wins.
Well, what's interesting is in the runoff scenario in December, what happens is numerically the turnout plunges.
Right.
Number two, the plunging disproportionately comes from the Democratic side. So the question then becomes, assuming that it is Edwards, and I'm not entirely sold on that assumption at this point, because of course we have to see how the campaigns develop. But if you wanted to follow with the assumption that it would be Edwards, what I see as a 45% Republican vote in November is probably more like 47, 8, or 9 in December, because you're going to have a more Republican-friendly electorate, and you do not have a Senate race at the top of the ballot, unlike what was the case in 2016 and 2020.
But she's won in runoffs before.
She has.
Let's talk about former State Senator Ted James. For him now, with Edwards being in the race, talking about Sid, what would he have to do to coalesce Republican vote and still get African American votes?
So if the question becomes what Ted James has to do to be that second runoff spot, he has to bank on two things. Number one, Republicans cutting each other up. After all, there are 4 of them. 2 of them, I would think, have a reasonable possibility at the present time of making the runoff. There's Coach Edwards, as you mentioned. There's also a gentleman named Nathaniel Hearn, who, according to an article I was reading right before qualifying, he had retained the services of a media consultant, which strongly suggests to me that he has the wherewithal to go up on the air. And when you're talking about a parish of 290,000 voters, going up on the air will be crucial for the next couple months.
Well, but again, you get in, how much money does he have on hand? And you talked about Coach Edwards, that's really the thing. Ted James has a pretty sizable war chest. Mayor President Broome is raising money. Can any of these people raise enough money at this point to disrupt any of the three of these top candidates?
Well, that becomes the interesting question, because you're talking about, I mean, this race basically took shape near the very end of qualifying.
Right.
So here we are talking in late July. Mail-in ballots are going to go out probably about 2 to 2.5 months. Early voting's in 3 months. That's not very much time to raise money and or go out on the air.
Listen, you know, it's interesting with Champaign-Roundtree being in this race, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, is that that voting dynamic here. There is a population that does support that political ideology and obviously the whole trans movement.
Right.
What do you think the impact of William Champaign-Roundtree will be?
Minimal.
Minimal. And
I would say she would be the Hunter Lundy of the mayor's race, which is the potential to create a lot of buzz, but the question is, what constituency would that individual have to be able to make the runoff?
who makes the runoff?
Number one. Number two, I'm going to leave the jury open, because you do have several people who could. There's one where you're using the criteria of name recognition. There's one where I'm using the criteria of available funds by the virtue of his hiring a media consultant. And there's a third person who he basically has to straddle the ideological fence to get a sufficient number of voters to outclass the other two. So it becomes a very interesting multi-dimensional game of chess.
So, you know, we're not, Alyssa's saying we got 1 minute. We didn't get into much of the presidential race. I got to get you back to talk about that, because
Definitely.
that dynamic is so different right now. But in under a minute, if you're calling this, what's the impact of Vice President Harris getting in?
Minimal.
Minimal. So you still see the outcome being that Trump becomes number 47.
Likely. One of the things you have to appreciate is the polls have only moved 1 point in Harris's direction. That's despite having almost universally positive media coverage over the last week.
John Couvillon, tell people where they can find you.
Yes, at WinWithJMC on Twitter, and I also have winwithjmc.com, where I periodically write about all things political.
Let's talk about the mental health of first responders. Very important topic, and we'll get into it next. You know, the discussion of mental health for first responders is really not one that we do a whole lot. We talk about military veterans, as we should, and people who work in education, but for the men and women who deal with some of the most awful scenes that you can imagine, there's not a lot of discussion about that until now. So joining us on the program, straight from Houston, Texas, former Baton Rouge Police Department officer Kawasaki Lee, and he and I were having a conversation about this. And Kaylee, it's interesting, you were in law enforcement here for a while, and you know the stories of what a lot of the men and women see that most of us don't encounter on a daily basis. Why isn't the discussion of mental health for first responders had more?
I think it's important. First of all, hello to everybody. I think it's very important because when my thing is that when public servants are not okay, then the public is in danger.
Right.
And sometimes we overlook that by working so much. I know for me, work had to overcome problems, which is a bad situation. It makes for a horrible situation.
So how do you cope? How do you cope if, you know, we were talking about the case of Devin Page Jr., and I shared with Kaylee that after that incident occurred, I ended up at a press event with some officers who were out on the scene of that, and just the discussion about how horrible it was for them to have seen that. How do you cope? How do you go from seeing that to going home? Because many of these men and women have families that are waiting on them at the house.
Is first of all, God. That was my go-to. was God. I mean, I had to pray. I had to constantly stay with my spiritual leaders, my pastor, talk with him about things. Another thing is family. Use your family. Some of them may understand, some of them may not. Use your family. Also, mental hygiene. Be careful about what you are putting into your mind. Be careful about what you're thinking. Be careful about what you're seeing, especially in professions like this. We have to be careful about what we allow into our spirits, because we're already dealing with death. We're already dealing with a lot of things that normal people don't see. Another thing is, man, get away, take you a vacation, and be on vacation when you're on vacation. Don't answer the phone. Don't do anything. Just be on vacation. And another thing is counseling, individual and collective counseling with your family. I will tell you that it has to be continuous. These 5 things have to be continuous.
Do you think, because I've talked about this with friends of mine who are in law enforcement here as well, do you think there is this fear of seen as being weak when you ask for help when it comes to therapy or whatever? How high is that hill to overcome, that machismo thing in people in law enforcement?
I'll say this, that saying that you need help is not weak.
Yeah.
The weakness is when you don't get help.
Right.
Strength comes when you say, hey, I need help. Because, again, whenever we don't say anything, then the public is in danger. Not only is the public in danger, but you also yourself is in danger, because the thing is we have to make split-second decisions all the time. We had to make split-second decisions all the time. And if my mind is convoluted with so many things, then how can I make the right decision in a split second?
I mean, you were a law enforcement officer for a while. What percentage of officers do you think are serving in law enforcement right now who need maybe some assistance or counseling or therapy, whatever you want to call it? What percentage?
I would say about 90% of law enforcement, I'd say about 90%, because sometimes the PTSD, I didn't know that I needed counseling and help until after I actually got out of it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that while in it, my blood pressure remained I think it was 165 over 105 constantly because of what I was doing. And I did. I dealt with suicide. I dealt with just being cantankerous throughout the day, very agitated, just things like that. And I remember talking to one of my good friends there at the police department. I'm not going to call his name, but he was one of my supervisors, and he came to me and said, do what you have to do to get right. He said, because once I learned that I had to do it to get right, then, life was much better for me. Yeah. And I really appreciated that. And for me, I'm pastoring now, but for me, doing what I had to do meant I had to get out of it. I had to change.
We got it. They're in my ear saying we got to wrap. Man, we got to do this again to talk more about this.
Let's do it.
I'll see you when I'm in Houston.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, back in just a moment. State Representative C. Denise Marcel is here with us. He got a lot going on this fall. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's first talk about something that's happening next week at Baton Rouge Community College. You and your colleagues in the legislature are having a discussion, an update. What exactly is it?
Well, it's called a legislative briefing.
Okay.
And what we thought was important that we would let the community know the things that occurred in the legislative session, the laws that have passed regarding several things, whether it's criminal justice, elections, voting rights. We certainly need to know what's going on with that, health care and education. So it's primarily the entire Baton Rouge delegation. Both senators will be there, Senator Cleo Fields, Regina Barrow, myself, Representative Vanessa Castle-LaFleur, and Barbara Carpenter, and Edmund Jordan.
How was the working relationship this past session? I mean, you had new colleagues coming in, very Republican legislature, new governor. How'd y'all work together?
It was difficult. And when I say difficult, it was difficult to get anything passed.
Okay.
That was substantive, according to what our agenda was, whether that was raising the minimum wages or the things that we fought for our communities, that certainly a lot of those things didn't happen. A lot of things in criminal justice, I believe, went kind of backwards. And there were a lot of things that they were calling voter integrity that I think presents a challenge, particularly to our seniors.
There are a lot of laws that were passed recently that will make it hard on people, from having to serve 85% to parole basically going away, to lowering the age of being an adult to 17. And I've said this before, for a lot of kids, particularly in communities of color, we need to inform them, hey, if you get into this system, it is going to be harder to get out of it now.
Absolutely. And so those are the kind of discussions that we need to have. And you know, we would love for the entire community to come out, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. So we're going to have a lot of the groups to come out that are, and the leaders in the city, so that they can get the information and then they can take it out to different churches and different places. But we're asking, you know, pastors, leaders, everybody, the general public to come out and find out what's going on. The only way you can know what the laws are that have changed is if we tell you. I just did a recent mailer to my district talking about all the laws, but it doesn't really explain them. It tells you what has passed and the acts that are now in place, because I want the voters to be aware and informed.
Look, I mean, where are you going to put them now? Because I think arrests are going to go up because of the way these laws have been, the new laws that are on the books. But where are you going to put them?
Well, I believe that the reform that we did several years ago when I came to the legislature is just being reversed. And I think what they're going to see is locking people up does not make us safer. All of us want safe communities to live in, but just continue to lock people and house them is not the answer. So a lot of the programs that we were getting the savings from, that we were putting back into the community, those programs, you'll see them go away because there will not be the funding there. And you know, what I liked about it, it was a bipartisan effort when we did it. It was reform, it was about the dollars. We continue to have problems with facilities and staffing for the facilities. So I don't know how they intend on moving this new agenda.
I don't know. Alyssa, give me one more minute here. The investment, you supported, and I'm so thankful for it, the effort to get funding for the Inspiration Center that'll be in your district on Winborn Avenue. And we got a minute. I need you to be able to explain to people, when you invest in disinvested communities, the upside benefits everybody.
Absolutely. And you know, I say all the time, Clay, you're either going to invest on the front end or the back end. It's cheaper on the front end.
That's right.
And what we want is communities that are prosperous. We want youth to be able to get jobs or get job training. And when you invest in them and you show them that people really care about them, it changed the trajectory. We don't have to worry about them going to prison if we're teaching them how to read, if we're there and giving them a computer so that they can access the things that they need to access. So a lot of these programs, many of that you support and that I support and have supported for a number of years, help to save our youth from going on the trajectory. You know the stats. If you can't read in the 4th grade, they can place you in prison by a certain age.
State Representative C. Denise Marcel, I appreciate you coming on. Don't be a stranger.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about one of these programs helping kids next. You know, we just had State Representative C. Denise Marcel in here, and we didn't get a chance to mention that next week on the 3rd, there is a back-to-school giveaway that she's done a few years now, and it's going to be at the Gus Young Park. And so there's the date, the time, and make sure that if you're interested or in the area, you take advantage of that. Speaking of taking advantage of something, how about taking the advantage to invest in our kids in education? Andrea Simmons, educator here. You've been doing this for so long. Tell me about the pledge that you have now.
Yes, it's an initiative that we brought about that I think is really great for our parents. It's campaigning for our parents, our pledge to be a part and supportive in our kids' education, which is very important, and collaborating and making sure they have the greatest education that we can give. So the parent involvement is very essential. You
know, for a while now, you've had a program that's engaged kids at Glen Oaks, and now it's spread to other places. Tell everybody about the LIT program.
Yes, You Got Us Lit, that's my baby. I tell you what, making sure that we can educate these kids on life skills, financial literacy, just giving them the leadership that they need to be successful in life. The program is in 3 schools. It's Glen Oaks, McKinley, and Ostroma High School. So just being involved and being engaged with these kids is very important. The passion is there, and in every kid or student that I can touch, we want to make sure that they're successful in life.
Education now is so different because it's not just about what you teach them in the lesson plan. It's really treating the whole child. Tell people how it's different right now.
It's different because, listen, I mean, life is different, and our kids are having to grow up as, so much faster than they need to be. And so because of that, we want to make sure that they're ready for those real life experiences that they're going to face. So if we can provide them with that information and those details right now, we can make sure that they're successful moving forward in life.
How can people learn more about your program?
They can call me at the EBR school system, and also they can email me at asimmons2@ebrschools.org.
I got a minute left here. The importance of parents engaging in a child's education cannot be understated. What's your end game with this? I mean, what's your number? How do you want to move parents more towards being involved?
Listen, we want to get as many parents involved as possible as far as coming out to events or parent-teacher conferences. We want to make sure that we're able to get that information out to the parents that they need, the resources that they need to make sure that these kids can get what they need. So we want to fill those football stadiums, and we understand, parents, we do understand that you do work and you can't always be able to make those important events, but that's why we have the resources, virtual resources that you can utilize to make sure that we can get that message across to you about your students and their education and how we can get involved.
Take the parent pledge. All right, I appreciate you coming through.
Thank you.
Next week, we'll have a conversation with this lady's new boss, the new school superintendent, Lamont Cole, will join us on the next edition of The Clay Young Show. You guys have a great weekend.
So what do you call yourself? Welcome.